Rain poured down hard. By 11 at night, the ditch had turned into a small river. Water spilled over the concrete edge, carrying mud along. At 2:19 in the morning, rescue sirens blared. Clara stood ankle-deep in floodwater, yelling into her phone as her silver Mercedes drifted slowly downhill. A garden gnome floated by, silent, like it was watching. The scene was bizarre. I'm Jacob Harrow, 38, a freelance software engineer from a quiet Oregon suburb. I grew up in a small town near Portland, where fields and forests were my closest friends. Now I live in a house I built myself, a haven far from city noise. My job doesn't need much talk, but my backyard garden holds my heart. It's not just a hobby. It's my breath, my pride, built day by day. At 1:47 in the morning, Clara, president of the Larkspur Crossing Homeowners Board, stood ankle-deep in murky water, screaming into her phone as her Mercedes crept into a neighbor's yard. Sirens echoed. The sprinkler system shorted out with sparks. Fruit trees snapped in the rushing water. I stood there, heavy-hearted, thinking one thing. I'd warned them more than once. But they insisted on digging that blasted ditch. They ruined my garden. So I gave them what they wanted, plus a little surprise from me. You're probably wondering how it came to this. Let me take you back 7 months, when everything was green and peaceful. Leave a comment with the number 9 so I know you're ready for this story. Like the video and subscribe for more tense twists ahead. Have a peaceful day. My backyard garden means everything to me. I live on the edge of a neighborhood run by an ambitious board, but luckily, my land's legally out of their reach. I built this house with modest savings and no flash, tucked on unincorporated land next to their ritzy cookie-cutter homes. There's my garden, pear, plum, cherry trees, and a stubborn little apple tree that sprouts every season but never bears decent fruit. That garden's not just plants. It's where I find peace, a legacy I want to leave. But to a woman with a clipboard and a smug attitude, it's a visual obstruction. That's when Clara stepped in. Her name sounds like a fated joke. As Larkspur Crossing's president, she always wore a scowl, like nothing pleased her. She never greeted me but loved stuffing board notices in my mailbox. Illegal and absurdly funny. I usually ignored her, and she didn't care about me until what I call the big puddle. A long November rain flooded their lowest corner. Everyone saw it was their design flaw, poor drainage slope and untreated soil. But instead of owning it, the board, really Clara and her greedy sidekick Preston from Lot 8, blamed me. Specifically, my garden's irrigation. They claimed it caused excess groundwater retention, which in their words meant Rosemary's house has puddles now. I learned about it through a snarky email Clara sent to the neighborhood chat, not directly to me, with my address in bold caps. Non-compliant water source causing impact. I'm not kidding. Who writes like that? At first, I just found it funny, but then the ditch appeared. One morning, I stepped out with hot tea, only to see an excavator parked on my land. Workers in reflective vests were digging a narrow trench along the boundary. It sliced right into my garden's corner, uprooting trees like it was nothing. I yelled, furious. They shrugged, saying the board hired them to improve drainage. I demanded they stop. They didn't listen. 3 plum trees lost most of their roots. A cherry tree leaned like it had been kicked. My garden soil, tended for 8 years, was now a churned-up mess. I stormed to Clara's house, phone recording, frustration boiling over. She opened the door with a fake smile, holding white wine. I tried staying calm, asking why she dared send people to trespass and ruin my property. She replied flatly, "It's necessary maintenance for the community's good." I pressed, "When did I agree to a ditch through my garden?" She smirked, "Don't overreact. It's just landscaping tweaks." I stood there, stunned. Tweaks that killed my cherry tree? She sipped her wine. Trees aren't that big a deal. Right then, I realized 2 things. 1, Clara had no humanity. 2, this was about to get worse than I thought. I tried the legal route first, documented everything, filmed, called insurance, hired a lawyer. He was nice, sharp, but helpless. The ditch sat on the boundary's edge, so big compensation was unlikely. Suing would cost more than I'd gain. The board? They had a legal team ready. Unless I wanted 10 years fighting over tree roots in court, I was stuck. But the board kept going. They sent notices, accusing me of funneling water into their neighborhood, claiming my irrigation, 7 years old with no complaints, was now a deliberately harmful water system. They gave me 45 days to dismantle my substandard irrigation structure. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Structure? It's a hose and gravity. Still, the garden damage grew. The poorly built ditch eroded with every rain. 6 trees started wilting. 1 pear tree fell in a big storm. When I went to their meeting to confront them, they said I was trespassing. It was closed. Clara called security, real security, to kick me out, smirking with papers in hand. That's when something snapped inside me. Not losing control, but a cold, calculated clarity. I told myself, fine, you want flooding? I'll show you water flow. But I'm getting ahead of the story. What really pushed me over the edge wasn't the ditch, the dying trees, or the absurd claim I'd weaponized my sprinkler. It was coming home one noon to find a brand new concrete drainage pipe punched through my back fence. Not beside it, not along it, through it. Someone had cut my fence, installed the pipe into my garden, and sealed it like it belonged there. No letter, no permission, no explanation. That night, I stood in the dark with a flashlight, staring at the pipe, a suffocating rage rising. They thought they could turn my land into their runoff dump, like I'd just let them take everything. That's when I decided. They dug the ditch. They pushed water at me. What if it flowed back? What if the garden fought back? Science is a beautiful thing. I spent the next 10 days researching things I never thought I'd need. Urban drainage codes, soil permeability, liability for misdirected water. I found tons of legal loopholes about rainwater, and the deeper I dug, the more I saw the board had cornered themselves. Their ditch wasn't just rude, it broke land use laws. But proving it in court would cost more than my car. A lawsuit would drag on, bringing stress and pointless paperwork. I knew Clara would turn every hearing into her fashion runway. I called my lawyer again, double-checking. He answered over the phone, voice flat. Legally, you've got a case, but they'll delay, countersue, and drown you in bylaws. You'd lose $15,000 before they budge. I thanked him and hung up. Looking out the window, I saw the ruins of my best plum tree. It bore fruit for 9 seasons. It was the first thing I planted after building the house. I remembered tying string around it to keep rabbits off when it was young. Now its roots were torn up, left to die. I tried negotiating one last time, clinging to faint hope. I sent the board an official email with photos, a damage timeline, and a local repair quote. They replied with a form letter signed by Clara, claiming the board was committed to community growth and would review internally. I could almost feel her smirk through the words. 3 days later, a new notice was taped to my front door, taped like a kid's prank. They accused me of violating water management rules, saying my land was now the primary cause of heightened flood risk in adjacent areas. Bluntly, they wrecked my property, then blamed me for their mess. My patience officially ran dry. Larkspur Crossing folks I'd never met started glaring at me as they passed. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox, scrawled with venom. Selfish landowners like you are ruining our property values. A neighbor who once waved every morning now turned away, steps quick like I was a shady stranger. I felt like the villain in my own home, and it wouldn't surprise me if Clara handed out pitchforks and torches at the next board meeting. But they didn't stop. Clara was just getting started. One morning, I jolted awake to loud machinery, then found a crew installing a concrete drainage pipe on my land, no hiding it. This time, under board orders, they'd expanded the ditch into a full water channel, pouring concrete and rebar into a trench now clearly encroaching on my property. I approached, voice shaking with anger, asking what they were doing. One guy said, "We've got a permit." I demanded to see it. They shrugged. Another handed me a bagel saying, "Just following orders, buddy." What floored me most was when I went to City Hall to complain, they told me the permit listed it as community common area. Ridiculous, it's my land. But it was stamped by a clerk too lazy to check lot maps. Bureaucracy at its finest. I filed a complaint that day, though I knew it'd take at least 8 weeks for anyone to look at it. By now, my garden had lost nearly 2/3 of its trees. The ditch eroded soil so fast I couldn't save it. The birds that perched on my plum branches each morning were gone, as if they felt the ruin too. I watched everything I loved fade, tree by tree. Meanwhile, the board shamelessly sent more notices, demanding I comply. I decided I wouldn't wait. I called Cormac, a college friend. He's a civil engineer with a dry wit and a knack for fixing small messes subtly. I told him everything. The ditch, my wrecked garden, the concrete pipe, Clara's smugness. He paused long on the phone, then said, "If they've used gravity against you, why not use it back?" That sparked light in my 9-week funk. Cormac came that weekend with topographic maps, a laser level, and a cooler of juice. We spent 4 hours walking my land, measuring slopes, finding bottlenecks, tracing where the ditch cut through. Their drainage only worked because my land absorbed the excess. It wasn't built to handle water with nowhere to go, or worse, water flowing back. Thus, Operation Reverse Flow was born. I didn't need sabotage or law-breaking. I just had to ensure the water they sent my way found its way back, with a little nudge. Cormac helped design an underground French drain, like a hidden water slide. I built it myself, bit by bit each day. No permit needed. I wasn't constructing, just landscaping, per city records. I swapped the soft soil along the ditch with packed clay and gravel, slowing water seepage. I planted tough, deep-rooted shrubs along the boundary, gently redirecting flow. Beneath it all, I buried pipes, carefully linked to send overflow from their ditch back down, straight into Larkspur Crossing's lowest points. I worked for 18 days, sometimes at night with a headlamp. No one suspected a thing. The board thought I'd given up, that I'd quietly retreat and replant my garden like a good little victim. But I wasn't replanting. I was preparing. The irony was perfect. I just let nature do its job. Water flows downhill. I made sure the next big storm would send it back where it came from. And when it did, trust me, it was worth watching. It's not over yet. Just 5 days before the storm, Clara sent me a certified letter, a final warning, demanding I stop all disruptive landscaping activities. It ended with a bold, underlined line: "You will be held liable for any damages from your actions." I read it and let out a dry laugh, thinking, Clara, you have no idea what's coming. The sky turned a deep gray, the kind that makes you check the weather app even though you know what's up. A big storm was brewing, a summer deluge that doesn't just water things, it tests them. Forecasts blared, heavy rain expected, flash flood risk in low areas. I smiled, not because I love trouble, I'm not the villain, but because nature was about to restore order, and I didn't have to break a single law. By now, the board had finished their monstrous ditch. A concrete drainage pipe snaked through the neighborhood, its outlet conveniently tilted into my land's lowest corner, where my garden once thrived, now a muddy pit with a pipe jutting out like a taunting arrow. Their new system looked clunky, overbuilt, and absurdly fragile. It only worked because they assumed I'd stay their sponge, soaking up their runoff in silence. They didn't expect nature to have a sense of humor, or that I might too. The rain started soft, a pleasant hello that made everything look cleaner, but by afternoon, it pounded down, relentless. I stood on the back porch, tea in hand, watching water pool in the ditch. It filled fast, faster than I'd imagined, even though I'd helped set this stage. Their flaw was never fixing the root issue, that corner's soil was too flat. With no drainage, water just sat, growing heavier, rising higher. My underground system? It worked like a charm, quietly sending Larkspur Crossing's water right back to their own backyards. By 11 at night, the ditch had become a small river. Water spilled over the concrete edge, sweeping mud into carefully tended flower beds. Someone's patio set floated by, drifting like a lost pool toy. I saw a figure in a raincoat running around with a flashlight, arms flailing as if willpower could shoo the water away. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Around 12:15 in the morning, I spotted Clara on her porch in a robe, one hand on her phone, the other gesturing wildly. Her hair clung wet to her face, eyes locked on my land, like she could stop the water with sheer arrogance. I turned off my porch light. No need to gloat yet. The show wasn't over anyway. Then their failure showed. The board, with boundless confidence, had installed a catch basin in the lowest common area, a big pit with a metal grate for excess water. But it was too shallow, and the grate clogged with leaves and mulch. Clara insisted on replacing every 10 days. I watched water rise, overflow, and spill onto the main road with a soft gurgle. The flow grew fierce. Sidewalks vanished, driveways submerged. A mailbox tilted, then snapped off its base. By 2:19 in the morning, rescue sirens wailed. One fire truck, 3 police cars, and a city maintenance vehicle rolled in, like a relief team arriving too late. They parked near the entrance, where water hadn't reached, lights flashing on a shimmering lake that was once Larkspur Crossing's pristine roundabout. I heard crackling radios from my porch. Clara still yelled into her phone, ankle deep in water, her silver Mercedes creeping down the driveway like it was in a parade. I couldn't catch her words, but her stance screamed panic, helplessness, disbelief. She was probably calling the city, fire department, or a lawyer, anyone who'd listen. But no one could help now. The water was there, the damage was done, and it all stemmed from the system she forced into place. Across the street, a garden gnome floated by, silent, like it was watching. The scene was surreal. When the sun rose after 5 hours, Larkspur Crossing looked like it had hosted an unwilling boat race. Lawns were trashed, mulch swirled in chaotic piles, basements flooded. The board's prized walkway sat under 8 inches of murky, debris-filled water. The ditch was now a broken scar, brimming with brown sludge, stagnant and foul. City engineers arrived late morning to assess. I played the concerned neighbor perfectly, close enough to hear the growing buzz, far enough to avoid suspicion. I brought a thermos and offered a city worker a cup. He took it, thanked me profusely, then pointed at the ditch, muttering, "Who came up with this awful idea?" I kept a straight face, saying, "Probably the Larkspur Crossing Board. They wanted to reroute excess water from the common area." He nodded, voice heavy, "Yeah, rerouted it all right." By 10 in the morning, 15 residents had gathered around Clara's house, shoes soaked, faces tense. Some waved phones, others clutched papers. A few couldn't hide tears. Clara looked like she'd gone 3 nights without sleep. Her robe was gone, swapped for a stiff jacket she thought screamed authority, but it just made her seem more out of place. I stood on my porch, pruning what was left of a pear tree, listening quietly. Voices carried far in the open layout they'd always bragged about. Accusations flew. Why no system test? Who approved this? Why won't insurance cover it? One yelled about suing. Another demanded an emergency meeting. Clara tried for order, raising her hands, shouting, "Everyone, calm down!" But no one cared. The community had turned. Her kingdom was sinking, and the people were ready to revolt. That night, I reopened the certified letter she'd sent 5 days earlier, claiming I'd be liable for all damages. I read it, chuckled, and filed it under evidence, just in case. Honestly, I wasn't worried. Legally, I'd done nothing wrong. I didn't redirect anything. I didn't touch city infrastructure. I just tweaked my own landscaping. If their ditch couldn't handle nature, that's their design flaw, not me. What satisfied me more was they still didn't know I was behind it. To them, the flood was just bad luck, heavy rain plus shoddy engineering. Maybe on paper it'd stay that way, but I knew the truth, and that was enough. Almost enough. The next morning, someone slipped a note under my door. No envelope, just a neatly typed page. From Clara, starting with 6 words. "We need to talk. Right now." I stared at the note on the kitchen table for 12 minutes, sipping cooling water, wondering how Clara's voice would tremble when I finally met her. "We need to talk. Right now." 6 words tasting of surrender mixed with desperation. It was the board waving a white flag, typed and hand-delivered in the damp morning light. I wasn't ready to forgive, but curiosity nagged. Plus, I wanted to hear how she'd spin this. For the first time in 8 months, she wasn't in control. I walked to her place at 1 in the afternoon, deliberately wearing my most casual gear, muddy jeans, a wrinkled shirt, and the straw hat she'd once mocked as very farmer chic. Her driveway was a wreck. The Mercedes got towed last night, but a murky water line still stained the garage door. Her front yard was a muddy swamp, like it had been swept bare. A soggy board notice clung to her porch, a badge of defeat. She opened the door, looking drained from days ago, hair tied back, eyes shadowed, the jacket swapped for a damp hoodie reading, "Property value is everything." I had to fight not to laugh out loud. "Thanks for coming," she said, like she was inviting me to tea, not the mess she'd caused. "I was passing by," I replied, stepping in without waiting. The living room was bland, lifeless beige, with a forced lemon scent. She gestured to the sofa. I didn't sit. She cut to it. "We need to talk about what happened, the flood, the damage." "Oh, the flood," I said, feigning surprise. Quite a memorable event. Funny how water acts up with an untested system. Her hands clenched. We think someone interfered. Interfered? I echoed, nodding slightly. Who? She hesitated. I saw it instantly. No proof, just a vague hunch I'd done something, but nothing to take to court or a meeting without looking foolish. I know you're behind this, she finally said, voice low. I smiled. Yet here I am. Not arrested, not sued, just a regular landowner with wet, damaged trees. She stared, trying to regain control. This is a crisis. Dozens of homes hit. Insurance won't pay. The board's in chaos. Sounds like poor planning, I said, shrugging. Maybe whoever's responsible should own up. That struck her. Her face flickered. They're calling for a special election. I could lose my chair. Such a shame, I replied, voice flat. She leaned in, dropping the pretense. Look, this helps no one. You've made your point, right? The ditch, the pipe. We overstepped. But now the whole neighborhood's suffering, and we're all neighbors, aren't we? I almost admired her pivot. The woman who trespassed, wrecked my property, and buried me in paperwork was now preaching unity, like we'd stumbled into this mess together. I couldn't believe it. You want me to do something, I said. What exactly? She paused, weighing her words. We need help. The city demands drainage fixes now. They've sent violation notices and threatened fines. We need access to your land to adjust the ditch, and your cooperation could ease tensions. I stared at her for a long time. She wanted me to bail her out, to undo the mess she'd made, not out of regret or lessons learned, but because the water had reached her doorstep, literally and figuratively. I'll think about it, I said, turning to leave. That's it? She called after me. I looked back. You know, Clara, you shouldn't have touched my garden. Back home, I fired up my computer and logged everything, photos, videos, copies of every notice they'd taped to my door. I saved it all in a neat file called Larkspur Reckoning. I didn't think it'd go this far, but Clara's power was crumbling faster than water rushing downhill. Over the next 9 days, the Larkspur Crossing Board fell apart. 7 residents formally petitioned to dissolve the current leadership. Someone spray-painted Drain Queen on Clara's garage. Another emailed the neighborhood a detailed critique of the original ditch plan, slamming the board for ignoring technical warnings. The insurance company denied claims, citing gross negligence, fueling more outrage. Clara tried an emergency meeting, but barely anyone showed. Board members resigned one by one. She clung to her chair longest, like it could save her, but she finally let go. Her resignation was short, defensive, and jargon-heavy, ending with, I hereby resign as Larkspur Crossing Board President, effective immediately. I printed it, framed it, and hung it in my tool shed next to a plaque reading, Don't start trouble, nothing happens. The aftermath was chaotic but satisfying. The board had to hire an independent contractor to redo the drainage, proper permits, thorough surveys, city oversight this time. They paid from an emergency fund, which ran dry right after. Membership fees tripled temporarily, and the residents' reaction was, as I'd guessed, no one was happy. Clara moved out 4 months later, selling her house for way less. Rumor has it she went to a gated community across town. I just wished them luck. As for me, I started replanting the garden. Not because I'd forgiven or forgotten, but because it was time. The land deserved better treatment. I brought in new soil, replaced the lost plants, and even built a small greenhouse. Ironically, funded by compensation I claimed from the city after they admitted their error in approving the original ditch plan. The garden slowly revived, steadily but surely, stronger than before. Birds returned. Bees came back too. One noon, while I was harvesting the first plums from the new trees, a kid from down the street rode by on his bike and shouted, Hey, you're the guy who flooded the council, right? I looked at him, flashed a smile. I prefer neighborhood irrigation expert. But sure, let's go with that. The kid burst out laughing and pedaled off. I stood there holding a plum, thinking how absurd yet wonderful it all was. They once called my garden a problem, a nuisance, an eyesore. But nature always finds its balance. Water does too. So do consequences. Imagine one day you realize that what you treasure most, like a small garden or a peaceful corner of your life, is suddenly threatened just by someone else's arrogance. That's where Jacob Harrow and Larkspur Crossing's story begins, and it's made me see the cracks in today's society more clearly. We live in an age where personal power or gain sometimes overshadows kindness and responsibility, from petty neighborhood disputes to bigger issues out there. What I admire about Jacob is that he didn't let himself get swept into a spiral of resentment. Instead, he let the truth unfold on its own, using wit and resolve to restore justice in his own way. From this tale, we can take away a lesson. When facing unfairness, we don't have to crumble or lash out negatively. Instead, trust in the power of patience and creativity to rebuild something better, not just for ourselves, but for the community around us. Let me stress that this story is purely for entertainment and education, not meant to defame, discriminate, or offend any individual or group. It's a fictional lens for us to reflect and find inspiration. What do you think of how Jacob turned adversity into triumph? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you find this story worth sharing, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful tales. Thanks for watching this video till the end. Wishing you a peaceful day and see you in the next one.